Okay, that's fine. So it seems there's no PDF reader, so we'll do with the. Sorry about that. So when we say artificial intelligence, then we are already comparing with humans or natural intelligence, right? And it's artificial. The researchers, when the people were starting to do research in AI, I think the idea was to actually what we call now as artificial general intelligence, to try to do something that human brain or does, which is from the low-level intelligence, like thoughts. Even when walking, his brain is involved. We don't really realize that, but even when you walk, thoughts, right? Yeah, and then slowly when you go to higher level visions, like vision, language, imagination, so these are higher levels of intelligence that you associate mostly with humans, especially imagination and thinking compared to animals. Trying to do that whole thing that this amazing human brain does, these days it's more artificial general intelligence, because AI is used for slightly different ideas now. And the way I would like to say it's like its ability of man-made agents to do tasks that's traditionally attributed to intelligence of some form. Right? So it means, if we look at examples here, so you know Google Translate, I guess, right? So the translation in itself is one intelligent task, and the software just being able to do just translation and nothing else is an AI in itself. Similarly, you can look at the softwares that can detect vehicles, that can detect distances, that's an AI. Or you can detect, or when you use Facebook, you get advertisements based on the way you use Facebook, the friends you have. So these kind of intelligent systems is also usually people refer as AI these days. And the last one is the ultrasound of a fetus, where you can see a placenta. Placenta there is automatically detected by an algorithm. That's yet another AI system. And the system that is doing this would have no idea about that, or even the context of what it is doing. Still, it's what the way term AI is used. So AI is not like it can do everything human does. That's something to realize. Now, from the ultrasound, this medical image, I'll go to healthcare. And even in healthcare, the way AI is starting to be used, there are many different fields within healthcare. But I won't be going into all of this. What I will focus on mostly is in medical imaging domain, because that's primarily where I've been working for last few years. So that's medical imaging informatics in general and AI. So I'll go to this section. And within medical imaging informatics, so what are we doing is we are actually extracting clinically pertinent information for different purposes. So that could be diagnosis, that is trying to diagnose, or usually for even better for early diagnosis of different diseases. It could be for prognosis, right? So you try to see how the medical condition will evolve for different treatments, and you want to monitor those things. You have surgery planning. So before the surgeon does a surgery, there are different methods that can actually help the surgeons do the planning, or robot-assisted surgery. And even for fundamental understandings of diseases, there's lots of when we could use machine learning and computational science to do this. And understanding human body, understanding ourselves, different parts, people have been trying that from ages, right? If you look at the Vedic literature, Chinese medicine, ancient Egypt, so people used to look inside the human body. How would they look at those times? If you have to look inside, anyone? We need to cut it, yeah, okay, right? So it's invasive approach. What people used to do in the past is mostly invasive approach, where we have to cut, and mostly dead bodies or even live bodies, people used to cut and look inside. But something fantastic happened around, let's say, that time, 1895. This is the first image known to humans where you are looking inside a human body using with a non-invasive approach. And this is very remarkable, and not surprisingly, that's the X-rays. It's the first Nobel Prize in physics is for this work, actually. So it's quite phenomenal. And after that, there's been lots of other imaging devices, imaging technologies that have come in the last several years. You can go from some of the popular ones like ultrasound, CT scans, MRIs, you know about this, but then there are many others like based still on similar technologies, but then used for different purposes. It could be optical coherence tomography. Then not just imaging devices, you have get signals from brain like EEG, MEG, and there are many ways we are looking inside the body, and basically for two primary reasons. What we're doing, we look at inside for the structure, so anatomy, right, and then also the function of the human body. So like functional MRI looks on how the brain functions, how different parts of the brain works. So trying to extract information from all these different medical imaging technologies and trying to make sense of those and trying to understand more or help in the clinical decision making. So this is the field of medical imaging informatics. Now I will go into next section where I will do why at present in this context, or how this is actually democratizing innovation, and what do I mean by that. So this is where I will go now. And for me, there are primarily three key themes in which we can look and see how we can actually make a difference in this field. The first one, like enabling new ways of imaging even from the existing devices. That's one. The second one is the frugal innovation, disruptive, low cost, affordable healthcare, that kind of innovation, and then even the fundamental research or biomarker discovery. So I'll give a few examples of each of these, and the why I say democratization is traditionally doing research in medicine is expensive. You need expensive devices, huge lab setup. Now for many, many different tasks, if you can properly identify real problems where few computers and experts, and then you sit down and work with the local clinicians, surgeons, you can already perhaps solve a lot of problems. And that means a large number of low-income countries around the world, in Africa, in South Asia, many places, could actually start trying to solve these problems if they have experts. That's another set of problem again, but if there are scientists, engineers, and clinicians working together. So let's see an example of imaging new ways of imaging. So this is fetal MRI. Has anyone been into an MR machine? Yeah. What are the two most important things they say when you go? Yeah. One is you shouldn't have any metals. Second, don't move. Yeah. That's the second thing, right? So you're not moving. You shouldn't move. But imagine a fetus. We need an MR of fetus. So how do we say the fetus you don't move? I was working in hospital in London for 2 years, and every Friday we used to do 4 sessions for ultrasound, which I will explain later, but there used to be 4 fetal imaging sessions, and I've seen many times, sometimes fetus just do gymnastics inside. So we cannot really tell them not to. In some really rare conditions, really serious cases, I know some people, but very rarely use sedatives and then do imaging. But mostly the challenge is fetus moves, and that means you cannot see properly the images for the specific purposes of diagnosing. And so again, I won't go into a lot of details on how this is done, but this is computational science, not necessarily machine learning at this point, but in the recent ones, in the last couple of years, we've been using this to better this technology by using machine learning. So what it's doing is it takes slices. So MR is a 3D volume. So you're taking the whole 3D fetal imaging, and when it moves, that means it gets all jumbled up like this. And now you need to correct for this motion. And you might have seen, perhaps, if you are aware of the cameras also, when someone moves and when you're taking a picture, or when you move, it's blurry, right? And then there are technologies quite straightforward these days to correct these kind of blurring, at least up to a certain level. And here it's slightly different because it's 3D and then slices, and it's non-rigid motions because you can have different sorts of motion. But still, what I'm trying to show is the fetal MR is rarely done around the world, and now perhaps it's 2 hospitals, one St. Thomas's where this is currently being done, and perhaps another one in the US in MGS, where they are actually now doing this to look into fetal heart and try to see congenital heart diseases. This was not possible earlier, but Once you have an MR machine and experts and some computers, people from pretty much around the world could try to look into this kind of research, right? Although it might still be expensive, but it allows you to image from the existing device, which earlier fetal imaging from MR was not done. And this could be used, for example, to look into the brain development. So if you have multiple images of fetus at multiple times, longitudinal data, and looking at the brain, so if we can get such crisp, proper images, then you can look at the human brain development, study those things. So you can do population-based studies for the fetus. So this is something that was not possible earlier. So this is one example. Now let's go to another theme where low-cost technologies could disrupt the way we do imaging, especially in places where traditionally the imaging devices are not accessible. And ultrasound is very promising because now it's getting miniaturized. Imagine going to a huge, so MR machines can cost $1 million, I think, or something like that, very expensive. But now ultrasound is getting really cheap, and you have handheld portable ultrasounds. But what is the challenge? Can you think of a problem? So this is really cheap, so we can just send this to all rural areas, let's say in India, everywhere. But what will be the challenge? Anyone? Somebody has to analyze, but even before analyzing, somebody has to acquire it. And acquiring proper ultrasound images, you already need an expert. Because with the ultrasound, the main difference, the challenge is, you get limited field of view. So imagine you want to get the whole of fetus. With the ultrasound, you can only see a small part of the fetus. So first you need to be able to recognize what part you are saying, and then you need to be able to maneuver the probe to go to the right place to take right planes. So those tiny little portable devices we can send pretty much everywhere, but sending experts to rural areas is a challenge. And for many low-income countries around the world, it's difficult to solve that problem for perhaps many 10, 15 years or more, right? So something has to be done. So my research that I was doing in London and continuing now in Nepal, well, there are two aspects to it. First, when you look in the image there, it's a project I find, Intelligent Fetal Imaging and Diagnostics, where the idea is to replace the human with the robot doing the whole scanning. And that looks quite exciting as a research. But for me, the interest is not exactly that, because again, robot could be yet another expensive device. But when trying to solve that problem, many of the things we will be developing will be very useful and actually technically less challenging to have a non-expert, let's say a high school student or a local person in the village, to be able to be assisted, to use ultrasound to take proper images and do some level of diagnostics on the site. So that's assistive navigation for the non-experts and some machine learning based diagnostics tool. And once you can acquire proper image, combine all those images for difficult cases, this could be then transported or sent to the remote location for expert analysis. So that's the motivation. And been some really exciting work in the last 2-3 years where so for this is PDF, so not a video, but in a video this is in real time when the sonographer is moving around fetus, it can automatically detect different parts of the fetus here. So you can see abdomen, cardiac, limbs, placenta, head, spine, all these things are being automatically detected. And you can combine this with something else we were working on. This is yet another result. So what you see here is on the bottom row here, these are individual ultrasound volumes taken by a sonographer. So one example volume. And you can see here, you cannot really see a lot of detail in one volume. What sonographers do is they keep on moving around to make an interpretation and acquire right planes and views. So what we were developing is actually, how about combining all of those properly in the right way so that you get something very nice and better in 3D, and then you can look at planes whenever you want after you record all of those things. So there's a slight difference here. So an expert doing the diagnosis or acquiring the image will have to think and decide in real time which ones to take, which one to ignore, right? But once we have this kind of system, what we are trying to develop is, imagine you are a non-expert, you have no idea which one to take, but you are just asked to go around pregnant woman's abdomen in a certain protocol, certain way, and the machine learning combines all of those images and makes a nice 3D, and also gives you the standard planes, the diagnostic planes that you need to take, like in the earlier image, right? So that could be very handy to step further in making non-experts do this scanning. And what you see here, perhaps this is more difficult to interpret for most people, but here the results are obvious, I think. So the bottom row is the expert sonographer trying to find the best 3D view for about 10 to 15 minutes, because many a times you get very nice views, but there are also quite a few times where you cannot because of the fetal position, because ultrasound depends on the quality of the ultrasound will depend, one, on the operator's skills, the other on the position of the fetus. If the position of the fetus is not that suitable, it's not always easy to get the fetal head or face features or certain planes, because there can be limbs blocking the view, there could be on the other upside down, so these sorts of stuff. So, and these are some difficult cases where sonographer experts were in London trying to do that for 10-15 minutes, and this is the best they could get. And the same scanning session with all those images combined with the algorithm, you get this kind of image here. And this is very recent. This work is few months ago now, let's say. So you could imagine this going further, where this bigger setup getting miniaturized, and the experts being partly been helped by the machine learning and AI, so that you don't need an expert to take these kind of images, right? So that's the idea here. So that means it could actually really disrupt healthcare in many places where we don't have experts, and there's simply no choice but to move to somewhere else and do ultrasound. Like in Nepal, for example, in many places, large majority of even towns, not just villages, we don't have experts. We're a relatively well-off town. It's hard to find experts, and people living there, 1 million, well, not in a town, but if you count with larger number of areas, so they have to come to the capital, and most of them cannot afford that. So just having this will be quite useful, I think, and same in many parts of Africa. The third example I want to give now, or the third theme, is it's not just about technology, low-cost technology. Sometimes even looking into fundamental questions, like scientific questions. Like you might have heard, many of you might know that in South Asia, the cardiac arrest, risk of cardiac arrest is higher at a lower age. Like early 30s, the risk is already high compared to the West. And I've been talking with many clinicians and cardiologists, like, what's the reason? And well, people argue, well, it might be lifestyle, it might be salt intake, it might be this and that, but actually nobody knows the real reasons. So, and there lies the question, right? We could ask why. And there are many ways one can tackle this problem. There are people working on genetics, there are people working on biological pathways, people looking at a yet more large-scale database of trying to associate with many different factors. But as an imaging informatics person, one way I could try to think of questions is, how about first we look at the morphological characteristics of large populations from this region compared to other regions. Are there bigger size, smaller size, let's say aortas or ventricles or these sorts of stuffs? Are the thickness of the aorta thick, thin? I mean, it's just questions. Right? We can look at those. And then we can also look at the motion of the heart based on and the morphology and the motion both together in a large scale, if by automatically first segmenting the different parts of the heart, because if you want to do this for thousands of data, I mean, you're asking a radiologist to delineate these structures is not that easy. Then if we get, then if we get something there, if it's not different, then that's fine. But if it's statistically different, people could ask, why is this different? And does it cause this sort of certain more increased risk or not? So you can ask many questions and then try to work, try to find out ways or reasons. So this is just an example. Perhaps there are many other questions that one can look into with data science, machine learning, imaging, but obviously you'll have to work with biologists and doctors. Similarly, I'll give another example. I like to give this example because at least in Nepal in the last 1 year, I just hear a lot of people saying, why do we need cutting edge technology? Cutting edge technology is for the rich people, not for the poor. And I really disagree with that. It's just that we haven't tried to, there aren't many people exposed to cutting edge or really working at the frontiers in most of the low-income countries around the world. Second, obviously, there aren't funding, and there are other issues which inhibits them or which doesn't give them opportunity to really dream big and actually try to solve problems, local problems that are really important to low-income countries, but needs really cutting-edge frontiers research. So here in this example, he's a very famous surgeon in Nepal and I think around the world, who has cured, as the New York Times says, more than 100,000 people, like literally turned a blind person into someone who can see in 5 minutes. So he invented a very low-cost surgical method for cataract. This is compared to the surgery that's done in the West. This is, in terms of the quality, it's the same quality, but it's way much cheaper. But the problem here is, if you look at the numbers here, there are these many people who are blind around the world, where although 80% are treatable, the challenge here is we don't have enough surgeons with this skill who can do this kind of surgery. So to train the surgeon, it takes time. Again, that's not an easy task. So what can technology do here? Anyone? What could we do to try to help at least minimize this problem to some level? Anyone? Have you heard of flight simulator? Yes? So pilots, yes, practicing in the flight simulator. So why not a simulator for surgeons so that they can practice in computer? So this is what in France, one of the research scientists from the lab where I did PhD, Stéphane Cotin and others, they are doing this in Strasbourg with Gates Foundation's research grant. They're trying to build a surgical simulator where you would see very realistic looking graphics, and you will have even the haptic feedback. So with haptic feedback means you are, when pushing what you see here, when you push that, you will get the feeling, the pressure and feeling of as you would in realistic scenarios. So, but building that means it's a very challenging task. And most of this task, again, needs computational science, domain expertise, that's it. Few computers, few experts. Why not dream and try to do this problem? You can, right? You don't need very expensive, well, for haptic feedback, I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but again, it's not really very expensive technology here. And this is still under development and right now. But if we have this kind of simulators where we can train surgeons much faster, and at homes or at their free time they can do this kind of simulations, you could have many surgeons, and perhaps we can help ease the problem that we face with the cataract surgery. How much time I have, I don't know. I have time? Okay. So this is, again, yet another example, the contextualizing the research. So here it's scoliosis. It's trying to measure the angle of the curvature angle of the spine. For scoliosis, it's like when someone gets bent like this. I don't know if you know about this disease or not. Lots of adolescents have this problem. And in Nepal, at least what I have heard from surgeons is they say they get so many x-rays, and it's trying to, the treatment planning depends on the angle, especially the angle of the curvature, whether they do surgery, what time they do, what's the prognosis, and a lot of these things. So they need to accurately do this. And again, you need an expert, or you need, if you have and since this is, you don't have this facility available in many parts, people from all over the country go to few centers, so that means they can be overburdened. So you need so what about, if you have a automatic algorithm that can accurately measure the angles, that means that is more, let's say, which is less variable than asking 3 surgeons to do the same thing. And you can do this in large volume. One thing it will help is the clinical workflow, but something more important for me is what I see in in the healthcare in Nepal is most of these standards. Let's say you have a level of thyroid, level of I don't know, the level of the curvature. Let's say, or not, at least in this one it won't be that different, but there is other kind of curvatures and other, what's the normal spine and abnormal. Especially if, I'll give the example, in Nepal there are lots of hills and lots of people live there who will be carrying water or lots of other loads on their back. Every day they walk several kilometers. So these people will have a shape of the spine which is slightly different. So the normal shape for them perhaps is different than for others. But then there hasn't been proper study to really accurately measure this. And the treatment planning will depend on what's normal and abnormal. So if you want to do population-based studies on these things, you can do the shape analysis, like this kind of spines, by properly, accurately segmenting, delineating the spine, looking at thousands of spines of that population against the other, and finding out what's normal and abnormal. So it's just giving you one example of the contextual research. So this kind of research is perhaps not done because it's not so relevant in many other parts of the world, but if it's important, so it's about trying to find out what are the real important problems locally and trying to solve it. Learning from Nepal in the title, so I had to put this, but I have limited learning as of now. I need to learn a lot more. But still, what I have observed in the last few months in Nepal is challenges is three major challenges. So this is not just for healthcare research, in general doing research in Nepal. One is higher education and research, especially in computing science and technology. It's not that great. The mindset, which I will talk about, and then I'll go to the healthcare part. So in the higher education and research I was trying to look papers up in some leading conferences and journals from computing sciences, and it's very hard to find anyone coming from Nepal. I mean, there are one or two exceptions for you that you can count in a single hand, but apart from that, there is no research. So trying to go into that kind of country and trying to say, okay, we'll do some really high quality research, it's already a big ask, challenge. And that's also because I think there's no good quality master's and PhD programs. So we need students, we need high quality PhD students and masters, but it's very hard to find them. So that's another challenge. And the funding is another issue. It's almost negligible, right? The other, even more important thing, I think it's about the mindset. So there isn't a lot of history, at least in the modern history, on really using science and producing stuff in Nepal. So lots of people there, could be subconsciously, but I can see that although they say science is important, but somehow they all feel that we are important in consuming the technology. Yes, we just adapt or consume the technology. We cannot think of, we should actually produce, or we can actually produce. This confidence, the level, there's almost zero confidence on most people because they haven't seen these examples at all. So, and we've been so that's important, I think. Even talking with clinicians, with clinicians I'll come in the next point, I think. So here, it's about, again, what I mentioned earlier, cutting edge technology. You don't need that. We have lots of simpler problems. That's another, even before starting to think critically, can we solve this? What's going on in the world? How can we solve certain problems? They don't think about that. And the other problem is like chicken and egg. So government or the business houses, when we talk to them, is science really helping us? Can you produce things that we can invest on? That's the question asked. But if you don't invest, how do you expect people to give, right? So this is yet another problem. In healthcare, we talk about AI, big data. If there is no digitization, if the hospitals don't record almost any data, there is no AI. That's simple. And large, almost I think we could count literally in hands the number of hospitals that have proper PACS, if you know, or it's digitizing the imaging system. Very few of them. That's a big problem. Clinicians, engineers, because they haven't been exposed to lots of engineers or scientists working on this kind of domain. So for them to think that we can, because they face these problems every day, right? So I mean, they have all the problems. Now we need to bridge the gap and have more researchers and scientists talking with them, finding a common language and trying to say, oh, this is possible, this is not possible. And this kind of things, it's almost not happening. We're trying to change that, at least at a very small level from our effort, but that's another problem. Regulations and policies, I think there was some discussion earlier also about this. It's not clear what to do, so you could start doing something and then after a year, they say, oh, you shouldn't do that. We need to build, it's like you want to walk, but you need to build a road and then walk at the same time. So you need to get engaged in this kind of things. Same with the policies. So what do we do? Well, we can just say, okay, this is not favorable, let's go away, we work somewhere else, where it's much easier to do research, right? That's one thing, which is fine, because but we are trying to do small things. I wouldn't say we are changing the whole landscape, but at least from our small effort, we have a research institute called NAMI, established 1.5 years ago. But then we've been thinking about this for 4 or 5 years. And its primary objective is research, but as with the problems and challenges I mentioned earlier, I think there are 2 important pillars, 2 important divisions we have, which will support the whole ecosystem. So that's one is the academic social outreach, where we try to work with the academia, with the universities. They are trying to help build better courses and take the students for thesis, master thesis or PhD, or even sometimes undergrad research thesis. We try to do the social outreach, right? So we're engaging with government. I'll come to that in the next slide. And also Winter School, which is, so the Winter School in December. So just last month we organized the 2nd edition. This is an annual annual event, and the last year we had 140 people. So it's a 10-day intensive AI course from early morning to evening, and from 12 different countries. We had large participants from India as well, especially from northern part, like IIT Kharagpur and IIT Dhanbad, I think. So we had a lot of them from Thailand, Cambodia, Nigeria, Uganda, France, some parts of Europe, Turkey, Iran. So we had people coming from all those different countries, and we had 22 speakers, some of them really world leaders in their respective fields. So this will be continuing. This is one thing where we try to engage lots of Nepali people and also expose them to really high quality research and education in general. Then we have the industry division, where the idea is to try to come up with startups, or there are lots of young engineers trying to do startups, but they don't have place to go and ask for help. If there's almost zero expertise, especially in the cutting edge, in the frontiers, it's very hard for them to just come up with innovations, because innovation doesn't just come out of magic, right? There's a strong foundation of research, education that helps this whole ecosystem. So we're trying to work with these industries and startups to try to incubate and help these startups to at least give them what's the cutting edge, where the frontier is, and giving them guidance, technique, and we are working with few industries. The other engagements we're doing, so similar to NAMI, there are 5 or 6, no, actually around 10 research institutes which have opened in the last 4 years in different fields, nanotechnology, biotechnology, chemistry. So we're forming an alliance and engaging actively with the government, with ministers, trying to come up and helping them build policies. And luckily they are also engaging with us, which is a good sign. And I think there's another important aspect is what South-South, in a sense, what we call as global South. I think we need more collaborations. It's not just about, okay, Western world and we need to collaborate. I see lots of young engineers chasing after big names, okay, MIT, Imperial, blah, blah, and that's their ultimate goal for many young students. And I think it's just limiting the dreams. Don't limit your dreams to go to one particular institution or second institution. It can be much bigger. And the same with South-South collaboration. It means the other problem which I didn't mention is in Nepal, if you have a white man lower, even with the lower qualifications, and you go Nepali person, most of the public will think he knows everything, right? I don't know if the problem lies here or not, but this kind of mindset, we have to change that. And especially if you look at Nepal, India, South Asia, there's lots of cultural similarities, lots of problems are very similar, so we can learn and share from each other and learn from each other. So this kind of collaborations, I think we should foster that more. So let's get back with a bit of digression, going back to the medical imaging and healthcare. I think the medical imaging and AI, it has really given us new eyes to look inside us. So the question is, how do we contribute to the world and to the humanity with this technology or with this science? I wanted to end in this slide, but didn't feel so right ending the slide on human-centric point of view, because I think our generation and the newer generation will have to think of the planet and the way the world is evolving. It's just what kind of things we do in terms of science or even outside science. It's really important. Humans being the most dangerous and powerful animal of this world, of this planet, it's their responsibility to think about this also. Thank you.